Hey everyone, and welcome back to Sugar Pills, a practical guide to self-care. And as always, I'm your girl, Candy Washington. And before we dive into today's episode, which I am so excited about, it's going to be a very meaningful conversation with the Jimi Vaughn on all things diversity, equity, and inclusion. Don't forget to like, rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast, and share this with a few friends because sharing is caring. And also take a screenshot of your review, send it to me at info@candywashington.com, and I will send you a free self-care gift. And don't forget to join me over on Instagram at Candy Washington. Tag me watching and listening to the podcast, and I will show you some love and I will tag you back. Don't forget to head over to the show notes and look up my Basic Girls Guide to Self-Care, which is all of my favorite goodies, and treat yourself. Yeah, those are some of my favorite things. You know, Oprah has her favorite things, and so do I. So go in there and pick some up. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our multi-talented and faceted guest, who is Jimi Vaughn. So Jimi Vaughn is a passionate and charismatic disruptor whose transformative approach to challenging biases creates high-performing teams and thriving organizations. A trained professional in human resource development, Jimi has over a decade of experience working for top global brands in the entertainment industry, where he leads company-wide diversity and inclusion strategy. He believes in the ethical responsibility of every decision maker to create an environment where true meritocracy can exist, which is just based on your actual ability rather than based on maybe like relationships. Can exist and afford opportunities for all by breaking down barriers that unintentionally limit people based on their identity. Jimi understands that people are the core of any business, and investing in a diverse workforce creates a more resilient company able to adapt and thrive in the changing cultural dynamic of the 21st century and beyond. Jimi has worked for companies such as the Down Syndrome Association of Los Angeles, Company 3, Deluxe Media, Warner Brothers, ViacomCBS, NBCUniversal, Fox, Nestle, Bunim, and 19 Entertainment. So we are in for a treat. So welcome, Jimi.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Katie. Like every time I have to sit through that, I'm like, cringe.
No. Okay. Well, welcome to Sugar Pills. We don't cringe, we celebrate.
We celebrate. We celebrate.
We
All right.
celebrate. We
I like
celebrate.
it.
Yes, we don't cringe, we celebrate. Because when you celebrate your shine, you give permission for people to join your shine and also shine themselves.
Yeah.
You know, two candles make a brighter light.
You know what? I love that. Two candles
Yes.
make a brighter
Two
light.
candles make a brighter light. So shine, toot your horn. You know, you're doing the thing. All I am saying is we rising up.
We out here. We
out here and we rising up. So
I love it.
Yes. So first, tell everyone just a little bit about yourself, and then dive into diversity, equity, and inclusion. You know what it is and why it matters.
All right. So there's so much. Not so much about me, but as far as like who I am, like you said, I'm Jimi Vaughn. I've been doing this work for about 15 years in some capacity or another. I've worked in physical production, and then also in like an HR and various kind of management like types of roles. And always had a concept of like kind of like the importance of equity, which I think distinguishing from like diversity and inclusion, equity being about fair treatment. So a lot of times people ask me the question about like, like what does it actually mean? So diversity, this is typically how I break it down, is that, diversity is a state. It's kind of like a state of being. It's an end goal. It's about all of the, different experiences represented in any particular group, right? That's not an action. It's just what is, right? That's the goal. That's the result. That's the goal, is diverse. And then when you talk about equity, equity is about fair treatment, which is why we talk about equity over equality. Equality is treating everybody the same way. Equity is treating everybody fairly. We've had conversations about like, standardized testing and things like that. So if you if you measured a fish by how well it could, climb a tree, that would not be a fair measurement. That would not be equitable. If you did it for a squirrel, absolutely. So it's just one of those things where it's like you want to make sure that like what you're putting out there and how you're treating individuals is actually fair based off of who they are, right? And then inclusion is about like investment. It's about a person's involvement. It's about how like how much agency they have over decision making and contribution and consideration and all of those types of things. So that's why you hear those three terms a lot of times in conjunction, because they work very well like together. It's the fair treatment, it's the inclusion, and then ultimately you've got the goal of diversity. So
Yeah.
that's that in a nutshell. And then just about me and kind of like how I got into it was, I am actually from Ferguson, Missouri. So I
Hmm.
was, exactly. Exactly. I grew up in what is now kind of like the epicenter of the shift in the way that we talk about like Black lives and just the racial disparities and injustice in within like the U.S. and to a certain extent globally, and that has definitely informed kind of like my experience. So I have consciously kind of like been aware from a very young age of like of difference and of the how certain things impact people differently and different things that are available to people based off of things that they have no control over. And I think I've always wanted to make sure that like we were able to kind of minimize the impact of that on others. So no matter where I went, that kind of always came up as a conversation. And then I ended up meeting someone who did this as a living, and I was like, wait, what? Whoa, that's like that's a job that you can have. Like, what in the
Yeah.
world? And yeah, and she had become a mentor, and I ended up kind of redirecting my career into this thing that I really really love so much.
Yeah, so that's when your passion met your purpose.
Exactly.
That was that moment where you were already passionate about it. You already just intrinsically loved doing it, and then you were able to add value to what you're doing to other people, which is the purpose.
Yep.
Passion is what you love, and the purpose is what you give to other people. So I love that. And I love your breakdown of DEI. Like, I'm just going to raise my hand. I still was kind of confused about it, but I love that you broke it down in such a tangible way. Just diversity is just normalizing the playing field. Like, your workforce, your whatever it is, just naturally should be a rainbow and a shade, and just normalizing having those type of people
Hmm.
at that level. And then equity, which I love, the difference between equity is treating things fairly rather than just equally. And I think that's
Correct.
a really good distinction. And then inclusion, which I think is really what we should be striving for, for now, is including those people at the table and including them in the conversation and including their perspective when it comes to making decisions. So
100%.
yeah, so I love that breakdown. And I wanted to talk a little bit about on the point of inclusion. About, I know you had a seminar or keynote on making room for yourself at the table.
Hmm.
I think that's such a powerful thing to do. And I think a lot of times, as maybe minorities, Black or brown, I think what kind of really stops us from doing that is not having that level of like confidence, and not having that level of knowingness that we inherently deserve to be there.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's always like, oh, you have to work twice as hard to get, what they get so easily. But I think we need to reverse that mindset and to more of a, no, I am here. I know I'm worthy and deserving. I know I'm enough. I know I can do this. I don't need to continue to overprove myself.
Hmm.
I still deserve a seat at the table. Or you can be like, like the Tyler Perrys and the Oprahs and the Tiffany Haddishes, and really just create your own table, which I love too.
Right.
Yeah. So do you want to talk a little bit about, making room for yourself at the table?
Yeah, and I'll preface it with saying, because I always want to make sure that people understand that when I talk about making room for yourself at the table, this is not an intention of putting the entire responsibility on the individual,
Mm,
right?
exactly.
The responsibility, there's responsibility that still lies within the systems,
Mhm.
right? There's responsibility that lies within the organization. There's a responsibility that like lies within the government, and so on and so forth. To be doing their part, right, and doing what they need to do in order to create, systems and processes that don't have identity-based barriers embedded within them. But in the interim, there are things that we, can do as well. And the reason I call that out is because I don't want anybody being like, see, this is supposed to be what you're doing. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. No, there are very real, barriers that are in existence
Yeah.
that an individual is not able to do anything about. So I wanted to make that, kind of like statement prior to jumping into it. But from the individual standpoint, because thankfully in my experience, I have seen that more people that are the gatekeepers that are in decision making kind of positions, they're more there are more of them that are just operating out of ignorance than there are operating out of will,
Hmm.
right? Will to keep people down, or will to keep people, back, or not give access to the decision making spaces. There are some of those that exist, and we got a different approach for those individuals, but the vast majority, I feel, falls somewhere in the space of either just not knowing or not knowing how to be inclusive.
Hmm.
um, and those are the individuals that you can make the most ground, like with. So as an individual, when you're trying to make room for yourself at the table, I usually talk about kind of like three things. It's preparation, intention, and awareness,
Hmm.
right? So preparation is, really about knowing your stuff, right? Know your own narrative, know your rules, know your rights, know the laws, know all of the things. Because in the corporate world, or in the business world, there are actual, protections, like government protections about like certain things. And the more that you know about that, the more empowered you are to engage and not be afraid of moving forward. Because a lot of times we're afraid because of the fear of the unknown. We don't know, is this going to, single me out? Is this going to make, me a target? When you know those protections that exist, it is you know exactly how to kind of like navigate those spaces, or you know a little bit more about how to do it, and you know how to do so confidently, because they're not going to say that because that's in violation of this, and if they do, I'm gonna call them on it,
Hmm.
right? Like, and there, that knowledge is power thing is real, right? And it's strong.
Hmm.
So when you're prepared, you also know what it is that you're going after. What is it that you're trying to actually achieve? What do you want? Is it a position that I want? Is it a salary range that I want? And if I think about the salary range that I want, have I done research on finding out, is this a reasonable salary for this position, or for what it is that I'm doing? So it's doing all of that preparation work, and then you're going to feel confident going in and just being like, no, this is the salary that I want, because you know that it's not an unreasonable thing to be asking, because that's, industry standard. This is what, if you're a woman, this is what your male counterparts, or white male counterparts are making in this role. So why wouldn't you ask for that? Right. And to be able to clearly make that, like, that demand. So that comes into the preparation. Then you talk about, your intention, which, kind of overlaps with that a bit, but it is understanding like what you want to get out of that, right? It is, what do you want to see? What if you engage in this discussion or this opportunity, or go after this role, what's your intended outcome? What is the thing that you're going to feel that success was for you? What does success look like for you? And you match that with the preparation, you'll have something that is realistic, and you also understand that, each increment that you are making toward, like that ultimate goal is going to be a positive step in the right direction, and that's something that you need. And then lastly, I say awareness, because I want I want people to be aware of, like, one, read the room, be aware of where everybody else is in that conversation as well, right?
Hmm.
See if they are ready, or if they understand where you're coming from. Understand, and also, like, be aware of yourself. Be aware of the energy that you have. Be aware of, what things are making you feel certain kinds of ways. be aware, like know when you've reached your limit, when you need to kind of recharge, and when you need to walk away, and like be aware of knowing like, is this the fight that I'm wanting to fight right now? Or do I need to kind of go away and then come back? Right. And I think especially for, like for your audience, as you talk about self-care, this is super important, especially for people that are kind of, breaking new ground and are talking about things that are, previously kind of like unexplored in certain, areas. You got to budget your energy,
Yeah.
right? And you only need to spend it in the places where it makes sense to spend. You don't necessarily want to engage in every conversation, because the recipient of that conversation might not even be somebody that can do you any good.
Exactly. And along those same lines, just to backtrack a bit, yes, I totally agree that it's definitely not just on the individual to enact change. It has to come from the government, corporate structure level. But when I was referring to, like self-love and worthiness, that is the foundation for people to first think that they are a deserving and they believe that they can ask for this stuff. So it starts with that core belief that they're deserving and valuable. To
Absolutely.
even go to the table to then enact, which I love, you said, being prepared, having your attention, having your awareness. But I think sometimes what stops us from enacting those, three pillars is that lack of knowing that I deserve to negotiate on my own behalf, knowing that I'm in a position of power to leverage my skill set, my knowledge, everything I have, to ask for that promotion or to go there, that the terms are negotiable. Some people don't even, it doesn't even occur to them that that they're not going to negotiate their fee
Yeah,
because they have
absolutely.
that belief in themselves. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I love the three pillars that you said, and exactly about, where are you putting that energy and getting that core belief in your inherent deservingness to then enact being prepared, having your attention, and having the awareness. I love that.
And I'll tack on one quick thing is
Yeah.
a lot of times when people lack that awareness or that belief in themselves, going through the process of getting prepared can often strengthen
Mm,
that.
I love that.
It can often strengthen that, right?
Yes.
It's when you start doing, kind of like your research, and you get more information, and you get more, kind of like understanding of how things work,
Mhm.
and what industry you're in, and who at the right level of people that it starts to put into context and into, perspective where you are in the process, and what you do know, and then you can actually know the areas that you don't know, and then you can focus on kind of like improving upon those areas. And when you do that, you become more and more aware of like, wait, I can do this.
Mhm.
Wait, and you get rid of that imposter syndrome of like,
Yes.
I
Yes.
don't, like it's
Yes.
just like, wait, no, I see that everybody that's doing this either has like the same level of experience or education as me, or less.
Or less. Exactly.
that
Exactly.
that'll
Exactly.
that'll get you into the deserving space pretty quickly
Yes,
when
that
you start to see
exactly.
that.
That will light the fire. And it's exactly what you said. Knowledge is power, and knowledge also has the power to empower. So once
Yeah,
you get that preparation, once you get that knowledge, then you feel empowered to stand up and say, hey, let's talk about, my raise, let's talk about my bonuses, let's talk about my compensation package, let's talk about X, Y, and Z, or da 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 da. And I think another key thing to do when negotiating or just going into any type of setting like that is also ask for specific benchmarks. So like say you
yeah,
go to your boss at your higher up and you're like, hey, I'm making XK a year, I believe and I know that I deserve YK a year because I'm prepared with da 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 da, this is my intention, you go through everything we talked about. Say you get some pushback, then have a backup plan. Don't fold. Say, okay, well, then what are my specific benchmarks that I need to achieve in order to get X, Y, and Z? So go in there and then ask for that. So then when you come back in 3 months, 6 months, whatever the case may be, you can then go say, hey, I did check, check, check. Where's my money? So,
yep.
you know what I mean? That's just what's going on.
And I have certainly done that in my career.
Yes, and that's just the way, to do it. And I think I absolutely love your pillars. And if you guys, everyone listening, I hope you're taking notes, because those are some gems right there. So let's get to it. So let's talk about the dark side of diversity. I
Ooh.
know that's one of your topics. I would love to hear, your perspective on that, and maybe some, what are the pitfalls of all of this?
Okay, so it's interesting, and it's a little bit of like clickbait, but it actually is also it actually isn't to a certain extent,
Yeah.
because I think it's important to understand some of the unspoken challenges, to
Mm-hmm.
understand why like barriers still kind of exist in certain spaces, right? So just because I know that you hear a lot of like, if you pay attention to this kind of discourse at all, when people are talking about, oh, there's a competitive advantage of diversity, there's equity and inclusion, but mostly like of diversity. But sometimes it actually can be harder to get up and running during the initial stages. And that's the thing that a lot of times people kind of like try to breeze past. But as soon as people start to experience that, they kind of pull back. And so I think it's important not to breeze past it, right? I think it's important to not try to rush to good, or
Mm-hmm.
try to skip steps. There are steps that are going to be challenging, right? And just because if you've got a bunch of people that have a variety of different backgrounds and experiences and things like that, just all in a space, but you haven't done the work to make sure that everything is interwoven and everything is considered and all of that, it can be, uh, tough. It can be a struggle. You can have more conflict. You can have all of those types of things, because there's additional work to be done. And it's not just, oh, throw everybody together and it's like, yay, like everything works now.
Exactly. It's like when you bring two blended families together, you have to do the work to create a new culture.
Exactly.
Um, and I think you're spot on. And I think another dark side of diversity, why that happens, is because the leadership, like the true decision makers, the true executives, kind of look at it as, oh, that's a HR issue, that
Hmm.
is a ticking a box issue, that is a PR issue. We
Right.
want to say, oh, we hired X, Y, and Z. Oh, we're doing this. Oh, we're so diverse. But the leadership mindset and perspective, experience, and understanding hasn't made a fundamental shift. So when
Exactly.
at the top doesn't actually change, and you're just ticking off boxes, of course you're going to have conflict, because everything starts at the head.
Hmm.
So I think, talking about, like diversity and inclusion, especially at corporate workplaces or workplaces in general, actually anywhere in general, it
Yeah.
really has to be an overall understanding. Like, I've talked to, with like Black Lives Matters and everything going, I've talked to some of my white friends, and a lot of them are like, they were like, wow, like we didn't even realize like racism, like yeah, we knew racism exists, but we didn't understand it was still to this level. They sort of lived in this bubble, because until it truly affects you, or until you actually witness it on a soul level, some people just don't get it. It's not that
Yeah.
they are racist, it's not that they're mean, it's not that they're anything, they just don't have the knowledge and that actual like visceral experience of it. So
Yeah.
I think that the leadership really needs to understand not just the value of having a diverse workplace monetarily. Yes, that's a gain, it's a business, we're all there essentially to make money in some way, shape, or form, but also the value of diversity on a cultural level and on just a person to person level. And then
Yeah.
once they understand that, like, oh, they're bringing these ideas, they're bringing these experiences, they're bringing these perspectives. Like, look what happened with Pepsi and Kendall Jenner. That was completely tone deaf. I don't think they
Yeah.
offend anyone, but nobody at the table who had the power to make an actual decision had any type of true experience of what they were saying and doing. So they
Yeah.
were showing diversity and inclusion, but they weren't telling it and feeling it. So And then
that's such a great example.
yeah,
It really is.
it's again, no one has any ill intention. They are just ignorant to the actual repercussions of what they're saying and the message that they're putting out there, which is why having people who are either at the decision level actually have that lived experience, or having a workplace culture where people who have that lived experience feel empowered to speak up and say, hey, I don't think this is actually going to go over well. But a lot of times people who have that lived experience don't feel empowered to speak up. They don't feel empowered to push back. So they just
Correct.
go along with it to go along with it. So it really has to start at that leadership level. And the second dark side of diversity, which I would love your opinion on, is one thing that I know I've personally had to struggle with, and some of my other Black and Indian friends and my other friends like that, is internalized racism. Because I know when I moved to LA and you would go to all these different like events and parties, I would be like one or two of the Black brown girls there. And instead of us coming together and being like, oh, like, who was your invite here? Like, let's do this, let's do that. We all had that internalized racism where we felt we have to be the one. We have to be the one chosen. We have to be the one getting the campaign. We have to be the one that gets the invites. So instead of looking to each other as collaborators and community, we automatically look at each other as competition. And that goes back to like tokenism. Like, there's only room for one of us. There's only room for one of us at the table. There's only room for one of us. And I really had to look at my own internal, because I didn't realize I was doing it. Clearly it's subconscious, and really switch that around. And then when I got vulnerable enough to talk to my other friends about it, like one of my friends, he is a very well established Indian comedian and host. He's done shows and all that. He's fabulous. And he was actually shooting a pilot for his upcoming TV show, and I was one of the guests on it. And we were talking about Kamala Harris and how she's half Indian and half Black and all that stuff. And we're talking about that. And I brought up, I was like, well, you know, there is a lot of internalized racism. And when I was honest about my experience, he was like, you know what? Me too. He's like, I always wanted to be like the Indian comic. I wanted to be the Indian on the lineup, you know, because you felt like that was like your way to be different. And then you also wanted to be the only one. So with that, do you have any tips on how people can sort of acknowledge and then heal from their own internalized racism?
Yes. And wow, I mean, there's so much to unpack there, right?
I know, that's a whole other episode.
It's like,
a whole other episode, part 2 with Jimmy.
Right. I'm gonna have to come back and we can really kind of like unpack some of those things. But you know, I do think that it highlights something that's so important. And it is, you know, that we don't get out of it unscathed either. So just because you belong to like a historically, you know, underrepresented or marginalized group doesn't mean that you know everything about the impacts that, you know, that kind of like the systemic racism that exists in our education, in our, you know, infrastructures and all of that has had. And I think a lot of times people are always like, you know, oh, let me ask a Black person, or let me ask an Indian person, or let me ask an Asian person. So what's it like for you? Well, they don't always know. Like, I'm just speaking from my own experience.
That's the whole thing. We're not monolithic.
We're not monolithic.
We're not monolithic at all.
Nor has everybody done the study to understand why they feel what they feel.
Thank you.
Right? And it's like, no, sorry, I didn't overlap you.
Oh no, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's just like people don't always know why they feel what they feel. Sometimes you just feel frustration. Sometimes you just feel, you know, kind of like, oh, I don't know. I feel like uneasy in this scenario, but you might not know why. Right. So there's a lot of that I think that people first need to understand, that like the same education everybody else went through, you went through too. So the way that other people see you, a lot of it, you've learned how to see yourself in that way also. Like, unless you've had an environment that has been intentional about, you know, keeping you from believing that messaging, then more than likely you've adopted some of those thoughts and ideas and principles yourself. and you may not always know that they're there, and you may not always know how to call them out or how to identify them, but a lot of times, to a certain extent, we feel them. And sometimes we feel them out of self-preservation. Sometimes we feel them out of wanting to succeed, and a variety of other uh reasons for why, like, when they kind of like come up. And I think a lot of times in the competitive space, when you see that everything else has kind of, like, your the value of what you bring to the table hasn't always been seen. The one thing that you might get recognition or identified for is that one characteristic about, like, your identity, that sometimes seeing somebody else come in that shares that same thing can become a threat, right? It can feel like a challenge. It can feel like, ah, man, like, I've been fighting so long to just start to get recognized and seen and noticed for what I have. And it's like, now they have that too. And it's, so it can, your initial survival impulse can very much feed into that. But, like, the reality is that there's room for all of us, right? There's room for others, to be great and to exist and to do the things that they do. I always talk about, like, the difference between, like, confidence and cockiness,
Mhm.
or arrogance, is that confidence believes that others can be great too,
Mhm.
right? So, and I think we need to kind of like take that into these spaces where we're like, what they have, and like you said earlier, it's like two candles make a brighter light,
Yes.
right? It's like they're not taking away from you, so there should be no reason to be afraid of that. And a lot of times, when you do band together, you actually create more room, you create more opportunity. You can even become leaders in the space, and, like, trailblazers and things like that. But when you try to reserve your power just for yourself, it also disappears with you, like, when you're gone. And that's the opposite of really what we want. But I do think that it is a valid experience for people to be like, um a little bit thrown off by somebody whose claim to fame is the same as yours. But I think we have to realize that that's actually what's happening, and that that's part of the construct that has been created for you. And you're kind of responding to it. And so you can either go along with it, or you can make a conscious effort to break that.
Absolutely. And I think it also boils down to like everything you're saying from your mindset. Do you come from a scarcity mindset or do you come from an abundant mindset? Scarcity
Correct.
mindset says there's only enough success there's for a limited amount. There's only room for one person who looks like me. I have to hold on to my seat and can't let anybody else come in. That's scarcity mindset. There's
Hmm.
only a limited resource, there's only a limited position, there's only a limited amount, versus that abundant mindset, which is like success overflows and there's enough success for everyone. And it's that abundant mindset, like we all can win and we can all win together. And also rooted in that abundant mindset is knowing that your net worth is connected to your network. So
Ah, yes.
why would you ever, I mean, if you are both at there, then clearly you both are bringing something to that event. You're bringing something to that room. You're bringing something to the table. So again, it goes from scarcity mindset. Oh, that person is my competition because there's only room for one winner, versus your abundant mindset, which is that person is my collaborator. That person is now a part of my community. That person is now a part of my network. And as my network expands, so does my abundance. And so does my bottom line.
Hmm.
So I think it's really getting that, switching from that scarcity mindset, there's only room for one, to that abundant mindset, we all, one tide raises all the boats, or whatever the analogy is, where it's like you can all come up together.
Hmm.
And it's also doing the hard work of really looking at yourself, because it is hard to say, hey, you know, why do I not go to that person? Why do I feel like, where did I feel that from? And a lot of that is working on, who told you that there was only room for one person who looked like you? Who told you, you couldn't be friends with that person or there was only space? Who told you that? Where did you get that belief from? Because it's all about
Yeah.
our belief systems. When you really think about that, like who told you you weren't good enough? Who told you you weren't whatever it was enough? Who told you this, and this? Like who told you that? And getting down to those like really pivotal experiences and moments and realizing, you know what, maybe this belief I have about myself really isn't even my own belief. It's just something I heard and chose to believe.
100%. It's like, and don't be afraid to address that trauma, because
Exactly.
that's what that is.
Trauma. It's trauma and you're holding it and you're holding it because usually at some point either that coping mechanism kept you safe, but now
Hmm.
it's sabotaging.
Yep.
And so you really have to look at that and get be okay with working through your own stuff, because usually, again, it goes back to usually people aren't that ill intent. They're not really thinking like, oh, I'm gonna walk into work and be biased today, like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. They're literally operating out of their own ignorance.
Exactly, they're operating out of their own ignorance. And then when you look at yourself and you're like, well, in what areas am I operating out of my own ignorance? And then when you get to that place of where are my blind spots, then you're able to have those experiences with people who are operating out of their own ignorance and show up in a different way
100%.
and react in a different way. And then therefore, when you change, then your experience changes, because you'll never actually be able to change anybody else. You're not going to be able to like talk anybody into believing the way you believe. But when you change your belief system, when you change how you show up, when you change how you react, when you go from ignorant to, awareness, when you go from scarcity to abundant, then you empower yourself to change your own experience. And I think that's what's really powerful.
It really is. And it's like
Yeah.
you change your own experience, but you also end up changing others as well.
100%. That's what we were talking about
Right.
earlier. So for you guys listening, we had this really cute moment where I was saying how um, going through different things, and he was saying we don't. He like cringed or something. I was like, we don't cringe, we celebrate. So it's like that. It's like when you celebrate yourself, when you change yourself, when you take ownership of the energy you bring to the table into any situation, you inherently change the other person's experience of you.
Hmm.
And then therefore you change that person too.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yes. And it's all about just when you give yourself permission to be free, and by free, I just mean loving yourself without apology, you give other people that same permission, because when you truly are free, you know that you're valuable, you're worthy, you got it, you are enough. You're going to walk into that room, and the energy that you bring to that room is different. The conversation goes differently. Like I was talking to, I forgot who I was talking to. Maybe I was on a panel or something, and they were asking about, this was a couple years ago, and I think it was a panel on like monetizing your content online and getting like brand sponsorships. And a lot of the people were like, well, I'm kind of too scared to email like the big brands, and like I'm kind of too scared to do that, blah blah blah. And I was just like, what are you scared of? I was just like, literally, it's an email. And remember, you're emailing a person. You're not emailing a building. You're not
Yes.
emailing a logo. You're not emailing some infinite entity out there. You're emailing the PR manager, like you're
Yep.
emailing the brand man, you're emailing a person. So when you kind of take away that big scariness and you realize that everything truly boils down to relationships, you're just creating a relationship with another person. And you always want to start your relationships from a place of value, not a place of need, from a place
Yep.
of, hi, I'm X, Y, and Z. I do this, this, and this. I would love to partner with you, would love to support you and add value to you. Because if it's a true partnership in anything, each person is bringing something to the table that the other person needs or wants, rather than coming from a space of neediness. And I was just like, I really believe that if you write your email and you believe that you are needy, desperate, asking, begging, feeling less than and little and low, that's how your email will be received.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%, and I have extended that into, into the corporate space, like as well, because I think there's a big thing that happens there where you actually shift the balance of power
Well,
when you come from that place of value as opposed to, to need, and and you always want, to trigger that collaborative mindset in the person as opposed to giving up something, right? That mindset of having to solve your need, because then it's like, oh, I now have to give up something to satisfy what this person is asking for,
Yeah.
right? But then when you talk about it in the corporate space of like, you're talking to a person. I know that people tend to like to speak about organizations as though it's like, these decrees are coming from on high, and it's like,
Not degrees.
right, because they're just like, oh, these things like the company is doing this or the company is doing that. I get that from a lot of like employees that are just like, well, the company would never do, and I'm just like, who's the company? It's like, it's a bunch of humans
Exactly.
trying to make decisions with like the best decisions that they can with the information that they have.
Exactly. And also,
Right.
you're the company.
You're the company. You're also the company.
You're also the company.
Exactly. And it's like, so then our job in those spaces is like, yeah, well then let's give them the information that they need.
Exactly.
And in that, they'll be equipped to make a decision based off of that.
Exactly. And you know what? This actually reminds me of I forget his name, but it's the founder or the CEO of PayPal. And his whole vision for PayPal was, making like, banking money exchange, making money easier, more accessible for people, like making sure people get paid on time and all this stuff and blah 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 blah. So he had this great vision for it. And he had done this survey for his employees, just asking about like where they were with like their finances. Do they ever feel like emotional or financially insecure, like things like that? Like, how is that working? And he was saying how he thought, oh, of course it's going to be like 5-star reviews and everybody's going to be doing great and it's going to be, sunshine and rainbows because I created this amazing company. And then when he actually got the real data, the real feedback, and he was seeing how his own employees were struggling. They were struggling financially, they were struggling emotionally, they were struggling mentally. And it totally blew his mind because, again, he was operating out of his own ignorance and he was
Mhm.
operating out of his own, not fantasy, but just, his own, like, oh, I built this whole
Experience.
company. His own experience. Yes,
Yeah.
his own experience. And then when he got checked, that reality check, when it was like, wait a minute, if the ethos of my company is to make sure that, my users feel financially secure and they can get their money on time, but yet my employees don't feel that, there's a disconnect. So
Mhm.
then he implemented different programs for his employees, like if they needed extra money or if they needed to negotiate their salaries or if they just, whatever issues that they were personally facing, the company had, programs and resources in place. And when he did that for his employees, productivity went up. um, you know, uh, the morale went up, turnover went down, people stayed, you had more employee retention. But he had to go through that process of saying, maybe my experience isn't the shared experience.
Mhm.
And that's really what it's about. When the leadership understands what is the actual shared experience of my employees and my clients and my consumers and my customers versus what is the silo that I experience everything through. That's really like the game changer. And luckily, he was a man of integrity. So when he realized that, he put the everything in place to help his employees. Not all founders are like that. We would
Correct.
all were, but they're not. But that just, you speaking just ignited that memory for me, because I found that to be really powerful. Um, is what is the actual experience that people.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
Like 100%.
yeah. Well, this has been great, Jimmy.
I feel the same way. I'm like, there's so much.
There is so much more. I'm gonna
Just
have you back for part 2.
happy to come.
Yes, because now, as we were saying, consider me a part of your network, consider me a part of your community, and consider me a resource. So
And
I'm,
the same for you, Candy.
yes, and I can't wait to have you back. So do you have any parting words? And everyone listening, I will have all of Jimmy's info in the show notes, but I always want to give people a chance to just tell everyone where can they find you, any last words, and just to say thank you for spending this time with us.
Oh, thank you. I would say, as far as like last words are concerned, it is, give yourself grace to know that you're like a work in progress, and that everything that you're doing is a work in progress, right? So I tend to measure success by incremental or consistent incremental forward movement, right? It's not, a lot of these things aren't going to change overnight. Nor do they really have to. I mean, there's some things that are more extreme that you do, but other things, the vast majority of things fall into the space of just being like, okay, I'm making forward movement step by step, and want to make sure that I give myself the grace to kind of let that happen. And sometimes that's all that I need to do.
Yes.
Right.
Mhm.
So yeah, and like I think those are my parting words. But as far as just like finding me, probably the easiest thing is Instagram, Jimi_Vaughn, Jimi like Hendrix, uh, and Vaughn, no second A. But yeah, I really appreciated this time, and I thought it was a wonderful conversation, and would be happy to come back and discuss, at any time.
Great. Yes. I'm gonna hold you to that. And it was great. All right, guys. Thanks for joining us, and thank you so much for joining me and Jimmy today. Don't forget to like, rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast, and send me that screenshot of your review, and I'm going to send you a really cool and fun free self-care gift. And until next time, my lovelies, be well.